Hello and welcome to PGurus channel. I'm your host Sri Iyer. Today I have a very special guest, venture capitalist, investor, author James Rogers. Now, I don't know if you have seen the one hangout that I had on Republic with Jim on the day of budget, prior to the budget presentation with Arnab Goswami. We had some interesting exchange of words and ideas, but I thought it's important that the viewers get a perspective from a very experienced veteran venture capitalist who has spent a large part of his time doing this and seek his thoughts on what he sees in India, where he sees India, what he would like to see in India, and so on and so forth. So this is going to be a very interesting conversation. Jim, welcome to PGurus channel.
I am delighted to be here. One slight correction. I have spent more of my time in public markets, including commodities, currencies, bonds, everything all over the world than venture capital. But I've done it all.
Yeah, okay.
I've done it all.
I stand corrected. I just somehow,
It's not that important. Go ahead.
All right. So viewers, Jim got his bachelor's from Yale in 1964, and then he got another bachelor's in economics, history, and I think political science. I could be wrong about that, in Oxford.
Philosophy, politics, and economics.
Okay, philosophy, not political science. Philosophy, yeah, got it. All right. Now, one of the things that he did was there's this boat race that takes place, I think every year, Jim?
Oh, yeah. It's very famous. A couple of 100 years old on the Thames between Oxford and Cambridge. Yes.
So Jim was the coxswain for the Oxford team. Jim, I'm trying to draw parallels between a coxswain and some cricket word, because that's what India really understands. But I really couldn't come up with an equivalent in cricket. But I thought the poorest or best substitution is maybe a point guard in basketball. What does a coxswain really do?
Well, a coxswain is a cheerleader. Obviously, point guards don't do much of that. But a coxswain is commander of the ship. He calls the strategy and the tactics and decides what to do. And he helps coach. He helps, points out when somebody's doing something wrong. And he steers the boat, just like the captain of a ship. He steers the boat, and he decides on the tactics. He decides on the strategy. I used to tell these guys, it's management versus labor, Sri. Mm-hmm. It's brains versus brawn. You guys are the physical labor, and I'm the brains in this boat.
But you also have to be you have to be a small build, right? Like a jockey.
Oh yeah. They don't want to drag around a big guy. No. They want to drag around the smallest person they can.
Yes.
Hopefully with a lot of brains, but very small physically.
So, and then he came back and, he was in Wall Street after that. He has occupied various positions. And I think he got into a partnership with George Soros. Jim, maybe you can walk us through your experience once you came back from England. Where did you start? How did you end up with George Soros? And I'd like you to maybe expand a little bit if you happen to be with him during the time when John Major had to step down because he was trying to shore up the pound. And George Soros was shorting it like mad. Allegedly, he made his first billion doing that. So please go ahead.
Sri, I went to Wall Street when I got back from Oxford, and I was in the Army for a couple of years. Then I went to Wall Street. I was there 12 years, I guess. I retired when I was 37 in 1980, so I was not there for the pound, shorting the pound at all. I've made many mistakes. I've had a few triumphs myself, but I have not had a job since 1980. I probably couldn't get a job, and if I could get a job, I'm sure I couldn't keep a job. But I have been investing my own money, doing many things since 1980.
Now, you made a decision. Well, when did your first book come along? You're an author too.
Well, my first book I drove around the world on a motorcycle. One of the reasons I retired, because I'd always wanted to go around the world on a motorcycle. I did that in 1990, 91, 92. And so my first book, called Investment Biker, came out in 1993, I guess it was.
So something sounds like the Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance.
Well, it's not as that. I'm sure I'm not that smart, but it was about the world. It was certainly about adventure and about the world, both the economics and the politics of the world.
So when it was raining or the weather wasn't very conducive, how did you do? I mean, you would just pull over and wait for the weather to improve?
Well, you're a good interviewer. You figure things out. No, we either got wet or we stopped. And frequently we would just stop, but sometimes we got wet. We didn't have much choice.
So
But
when you were going through Europe, did you use the Silk Road or something like that?
we used I'm sorry, we used what?
The Silk Road, the one that connects.
I did the Silk Road. I did the Silk Road. Well, not before it was the Silk Road, but before it was the new Silk Road. No. I crossed China on a motorcycle in 1988 before the trip, and made a movie of that trip. There was no road. Chinese told me there's no road. I said, I don't care. I can do it. They were right. They were right. It was a nightmare. I made it, but it was a real nightmare. But I did make it, and they made a movie of this crazy American being the first person to drive a motorcycle across China. A nut.
So you spent a few years in America, and then you made a decision to move east. What prompted you to make that decision?
Well, Sri, I had been lecturing. I first went to China in 1984 and terrified. I'd been listening to American propaganda all my life that the Chinese were evil, vicious, bloodthirsty, dangerous people. I got there and I found out, no, they're not. They're cultured, they're historic, they're hardworking, they're educated. And I went back to America and said, China's the next great country in the world, which I said for some time, to great ridicule at the time. But I used to say to people, if you're going to have children, you must teach them Mandarin and your grandchildren. So then I had one, 2003, this little girl came along. And so we were teaching her Mandarin in New York, but I realized if I was serious, I should move to Asia. And I said to everybody, look, in 1807, if you were smart, you moved to London. In 1907, if you were smart, you moved to New York. Well, in 2007, if you're smart, you moved to Asia. I'd been saying these things, so I decided I better act on them, and I did. And here we are. We came to Asia, and it's been quite successful.
So when you moved to Asia, did you get rid of some of your positions in the American markets? Because 2007, early 2008 is when the proverbial excrement fell out of the ceiling.
Well, I was quite visible and loud in the American TV in those days about that the disaster was coming. I was short Citibank. I was short all the investment banks. Everybody knew I was short Fannie Mae. Everybody knew my position going into all of that, and that 2008 was a good year for me.
All right. So now
But Sri, I make plenty of mistakes. Don't get me wrong. I make a lot. You want to hear about my first wife?
Absolutely.
What a mistake that was. What a horrible mistake that was. So I make plenty of mistakes. Don't think it.
But
I'll tell you another. Hold on. Want to hear it? Yeah. All my life, I used to rail that children were a total waste of time. One should not have children. I was never going to do anything so stupid as to have children. I felt so sorry for my friends. Well, I was totally wrong, completely 100% wrong about children. I was 60 years old. I had my first child in 2003, and it is fabulous. So everybody watching this, if you haven't done it, go home and have a child. Take a day off. Well, don't take a day off, but go home for lunch. Go home for lunch. These are difficult times.
Well, third time was a lucky for you. I mean, third time is a charm. Always.
Yes.
You've stayed married after that. Now, so you have, so you said that you trade in a certain set sort of things, commodities, stocks, and so on and so forth. Now, when did you first go to India?
Well, that's a very good question. When you get as old as I am, you forget things like that. A long time ago, I first went to India. Probably 1988.
Okay, that was maybe. Rajiv Gandhi's.
Maybe. Yeah. One of the reasons, shortly after that, the whole world had realized that communism didn't work anymore. Nobody wanted to be a communist. Nobody wanted to be a socialist. If they wanted to be a socialist, they wanted to be a rich socialist. Mm-hmm. But India was one of the last. But everybody was privatizing, so India said, "We're going to privatize too."
Right.
Unfortunately, in the next 10 years, they only privatized one company, and that was a bakery. That was partly because the Indian bureaucracy, and I learned the first time I was there, the Indian bureaucracy is the worst in the world. You learned it from the English, and then you took it to a higher plane. You developed it even further. So India still, as far as I can see, has the worst bureaucracy in the world.
To be fair to Narendra Modi, he has been trying to make a lot of changes to the bureaucracy with the same bureaucracy, which is a questionable thing. But one of the things he's trying to do now, he's trying to bring in lateral moves into the administrative setup, wherein he's not saying that a person has to be of the Indian administrative services. I'm putting all the services in one. I mean, this is the thing that the British left behind. It was called as Indian Civil Services those days. You sat down for an exam. This was the creme de la creme of the society. These people, got in. They became, they started out as assistant collectors of the district. They would sometimes even dispense justice. They were magistrates too. In fact, even to this day, there are some states in India where the collector, the IAS officer, can also be a magistrate and rule on, judicial, act like a judge. So there are lots of interesting things here. Now, my question to you, Jim, is you said something in 2001 that India was not going to be what it is at 2001. In 30, 40 years, it's going to, completely disintegrate or disappear. What made you say that?
Well, first of all, Sri, I better tell you, I frequently speak around the world, and I always tell people, or nearly always, if you can only visit one country in the world, it should be India. There is no country that has the man-made and natural sites like India. The foods, the languages, the men are smart and handsome. The women, oh my gosh, the women are always winning the world beauty contest. So as you know, India has it all. It's an astonishing place to visit. But I also say, in my view, they do have the world's worst bureaucracy, which they learned from the English. They do have this thing that they think if you went to Oxford and Cambridge, for instance, they think you must be smart, you must be able to run an empire. I live in Singapore now, same thing. They think if you're an Oxford or Cambridge graduate, or Harvard or Yale graduate, you must be smart. I went to Yale, as you said. I went to Oxford, as you said. I know that doesn't make you smart. I know that does not make you qualified for much of anything, except to say I went to Yale, I went to Oxford. That's not going to go very far in life. But India does have this horrible bureaucracy. And, India was pushed together in 1947. The British were doing their best to get out of there. The mess they made of Pakistan, and East and West Pakistan, as they were called then. And they more or less made the same mess of India. If you look at historic maps over the past few thousand years, the India we see there today has never existed, not like it does today. It's always been several countries, several ethnic groups, several religions, several linguistic groups, several everything. It's a fantastic country, but in my mind, it doesn't make much sense, historic sense anyway. There are many languages you can't speak to each other. You don't like each other. There's nothing wrong with not liking each other, but it probably usually throughout history, when a nation has been put together like this, it rarely lasts very long. In fact, Sri, in one of my books, I make the point, I know of no country in the world, in history, where the government and the country have lasted as long as 200 years. If you know a country that has lasted longer than 200 years, please correct me.
But what about the US of A? Of course, you're going to quote the Civil War.
Well, the borders at the US of A have only been around since 1912. Oh, not even that now, since 1958 or 59. And yes, I can cite the war between the states, but what I was saying was the borders and the government have never stayed the same for as long as 200 years. Yes, you could say, well, the USA is changes, but we have certainly not had the same borders. Our borders changed as recently as 1958, or you could even say back to 1907, 1912. But even that's only 100 years. So right. No, the U.S., we'll see. We can speak again in 100 years or so, and we'll see. There are already secessionist movements again in the U.S. California wants to secede. Various parts of the Pacific Northwest wants to get out. No, there are already people trying to get out again.
Yes, that's an interesting topic for a different day, I guess. But
A
Jim,
different
you're
day,
right.
different day.
You're right. See, India annexed Sikkim, a small state, a sleepy state in the north, nestled in the northeast, and that I think happened in 1970s. Indira Gandhi did that. Just overnight, it became just another state of India.
Yeah,
So,
no, I know.
and
And listen,
and yeah,
but
go
I
ahead.
want to tell you again, if you
Mm.
could only visit one country in your life, only one, it's got to be India. It is everything, including history. It's got everything that a person could
That's
possibly
that's
want.
that's so true. That's so true. Now, Jim, here my just perception based on what you just made an observation. In 1962, the Chinese invaded India, and India was still finding its feet as a country. But something very interesting that happened. The Indian government didn't have money. They didn't have money to buy arms. They didn't have money for just about anything. And what they did was they sent their chief ministers in different places. They rode open jeeps and they went through streets saying that we need you to help us. We need money to buy fuel. We need money to buy arms and anything. And as a nation, India just they gave away their bangles. I mean, if you know Indian women, their gold is their thing for the rainy
Everything.
day, everything, right? And yet they didn't think one moment to say that is this going to go to the politician's pocket or is it going to go to the country's coffers. They did that as a country. So and this has repeated itself again and again every time India faced war. But war shouldn't be the way that a country needs to find its identity to unite, because once that goes away they're back to their fighting ways. I think that's what you have observed. And I mean, I give you a little bit of that happens. And you have to also remember that there is no other country with this kind of population and still being a democracy. I mean, China has a slightly larger population, but come on now, is there any democracy there? So that answers that part. So there's a pluralistic society, full of contradictions, yet they all sit together, watch cricket. It's too bad that India lost in the semifinals, but these things do happen. I mean, these are the delightful, if I, for a lack of a better word, oxymorons that characterize India. I mean, you have, in fact, I just wrote 3-4 days ago about how I had a chat with somebody else where I said that India has a part of it in the 18th century, a part of it in the 19th century. Most of it is still in the 20th century. There is some in the 21st, and there is some in the 22nd also. You see, so
Not much.
so this is what defines India. But you are absolutely right. India lacks an identity, and there are efforts being made. I think that's we are drifting away from the main point. My point to you was you compared India with Russia, and you said that any day you would invest in Russia. And I think you've been doing this for a while, because I remember reading your work some years ago where you said the same thing, that your primary point at that point was that India's currency was not fully convertible. I grant you that even today it is not. But you tell me a little bit about your experiences with investing in Russia.
Okay, we could do 6 or 7 programs, Sri. I can see this could be a lot of fun. I just want to jump back a couple of, having being a student of history, as you know, whenever there's a war, both sides claim the other side invaded. You
Yeah.
just said the Chinese invaded. Well, the Chinese said the Indians invaded. So I don't know. I wasn't there, but you'd have to give both sides of the story. I would also say, yes, war has always been a unifying thing. Politicians frequently, when they get in trouble worldwide, I'm not talking about India, they start a war. They know that's a way they can get support and they can get people to do what they say, which is one of the negatives about war. But back to your question. I first went to Russia in 1966, and I went to whole Soviet, many of the Iron Curtain, and I came away saying this is never going to work. And I was bearish for the next 48 years. You talk about a long-term bear. I was extremist. It will never work. And every time I went, I hated it. I didn't like it. I couldn't see any reason for it to work. I drove across from the Pacific Ocean to Europe twice, through the Soviet Union, through Siberia, and I knew it couldn't work. But then, in recent years, I have started investing in Russia because I see a change. think I see a major change in the Kremlin. And when you see change, when I see change, I try to change myself. And I invest. They have huge natural resources, as you know. They have a convertible currency. Most countries in that stage of development do not have current convertible currencies, as you know. They have very little debt. I mean, nobody would lend money to the communists, for goodness sakes. So, of course, they don't have too much debt. So they have a lot of things going for them. And if my perception of the change in the Kremlin is right, if the Kremlin now understands you can't just shoot people, you can't just put them in jail, you can't just take their assets, you have to work with them by strict rules if you're going to succeed, then Russia has enormous, enormous potential. And especially now, because everybody put sanctions on Russia and drove down the price of many assets. I'm a director of a couple of a fertilizer company and an agricultural company in Russia. And every day, Sri, Russian farmers wake up and say, "Thank you, Mr. Trump. Thank you, Mr. Trump." They put sanctions on. So they're booming. They're booming. Agriculture in Russia is booming because of these sanctions. You know, America's now building a huge, prosperous agricultural industry in Russia again. You read Russian history, Russian novels, many times. They had great agriculture. They're going to have it again. And in 15 years, American farmers are going to say, why are we having to compete with the Russians? You know, but by then they'll be successful. They'll know what they're doing. They'll have big farms, and we America, will regret it again.
Now, I'm putting myself in your shoes. You're an investor. You're trying to put your money where you can get the maximum bang for the buck. And you probably considered other countries other than Russia. And like water going from a higher level to a lower level, you felt that Russia was the destination for you. Now, let's go back to your perception about India and India as an investment climate. Now, if I can remember what you said in that hangout at Republic TV, you said that India's debt is unbearable. And I would tell you something else, but I want you to first expand on that a little bit, because then I can maybe ask you a more intelligent or nuanced question.
Well, I don't know if I'll have an intelligent answer, but I will tell you what I have read. The studies I have read in the past few years say that India, the debt to GDP is over 90%. Now, I haven't done the measurements, but other people have who publish these facts. And the other day on the show, I think somebody said, no, it's much lower than that. So I don't know. I do know that I have read over the years various and sundry sources which say that India's debt to GDP is over 90%.
Well, let's see one thing though. They don't owe any money to any foreign countries. I mean, they no longer take IMF loans or World Bank loans. That's a thing of the past. And even when there are natural disasters in India, India has found a way to, dig deep and come up with its own solutions. Now, as far as the debt to GDP ratio is concerned, I also don't know, but then so do all the other countries, US, even United Kingdom. They all have very high numbers, right?
I'm not saying no. I'm not saying just because the UK. I mean, UK is a disaster. I mean, I love the UK. I went to Oxford. I was in a boat race. My first Guinness record. I got married in the UK. No, I love the UK. But that doesn't mean it's not a disaster, a pending disaster. A lot of countries have a lot of debt. We're all going to, Sri, in 2008, the world had a serious problem because of too much debt.
Yes.
Since then, the debt has skyrocketed everywhere. The next time we have an economic problem, and we will have economic problems again, we always have, we always will, it's going to be the worst in my lifetime. It's going to be a nightmare because the debt is so much higher. And then you throw in Donald Trump, and who knows what he'll do with the trade wars or real war. Oh no, we're going to have a nightmare, a disaster next time we have an economic problem.
That's true. But you see, in the 2008 crisis, India rode that because they didn't have much exposure to the foreign banks. And some even joke that for India to have lost, they should have competed. They didn't even compete. So where is the question of losing money?
Well, that's a point I make about India often. Yes, that very point. I say to people, all right, look out the window. How many Indian products do you see? You see Japanese products, Korean products, Chinese products. How many Indian? You don't see any Indian cars, Indian refrigerators, Indian anything. And the facts are you don't. I repeat, it's a fabulous country. but it's not a great economic powerhouse except in its own mind.
Jim, if I have to draw a crude parallel, have you watched Seinfeld?
Have I watched what?
Seinfeld.
Oh, no, I'm sorry. I don't have a TV.
No, this came in the 90s.
I know. I didn't have a TV in the 90s either, Sri. I'm sorry. I'm an embarrassment.
Outlier.
I am a total embarrassment. I have never had a TV.
At any rate, so people always said that Seinfeld was a show about nothing. But when the show concluded after 10 successful years, they said, wait, this wasn't a show about nothing. This was a show about everything. Now, my parallel to you is, where do you find Indian products? Indian products may not be on the shelf, but it's the Indian engineer that is inventing the next generation chip. You take Qualcomm, for example, 20 to 25% of the workforce, Indian. Intel, 20 to 25% workforce, Indian. I can go on and on. So that is how India is making its presence felt. The same.
Go ahead.
You go to South Korea.
It used to be when I used to visit people on Wall Street, and they were all talking about computerization and how it's all going to be on the internet. And you know what they used to say? People would say, well, what do we do? And they would say, find yourself an Indian. Find yourself an Indian and you can compete if they know what they're doing. You're exactly right, but you just made a very telling statement. You know why? Because there are no opportunities in India. They all leave. There are not enough universities. Most Indians do not stay in school after age 12. Many of them immigrate. And the reason they immigrate is because the opportunities are elsewhere. The education is elsewhere. Yeah, Silicon Valley is full of Indians. Wall Street is full of Indians. Why? Why aren't they in Mumbai? Why aren't they in Kolkata? Because there's nothing for them to do, and the opportunities are elsewhere, including the education.
And that's true. We have a lot of education in numbers, but not in quality. In fact, somebody joked that the first 15, 20 years of its existence, the IITs, 100% export. 100% export to United States and the West. Very few stayed back. Very few. Although the trend is changing now, a few are staying back. Still, I think 90% is probably still a good exchange rate. Now, Jim, I'm going to ask you a slightly different question. Modi calls you and says, Jim, I want you to come and invest in India because I want to use that to hang a hat and say, listen, all the other guys, Jim trusts me because I did these following 3 things for him that he wanted me to do about India that would make him to come to India as an investment destination. What would those 3 things be?
Well, first, I want you to know I was a fan of Mr. Modi. When he was out in the provinces, he said he did good things. He had a great PR and great reputation. He ran on that platform. I invested in India because I expected him to win. But after a few months, I realized he hadn't done anything. I mean, he cleaned up some toilets. He deregulated the pickle market. It's great. I think the pickle market should be deregulated. But I didn't see much. Everywhere he went around the world, people loved him. I mean, he's fabulous. He's fabulous on TV. He's fabulous on stage. He's a great guy. But I didn't see much happening other than good PR. So I sold my India because of that. So I had great confidence. I still haven't seen much real change. But if he asked me, I would say, okay, Mr. Modi, if you're going to do it, first thing you have to do is deregulate the currency market. You have to open your currency. Let people buy and sell it or whatever. Now, it's a long-term Indian bureaucracy. Their whole brain set is, no, we cannot have an open currency. We won't have jobs if we have an open currency. So they do their best to protect the currency, which is absurd. This is 2019. This is not 1919. Even Russia has a convertible currency, so that's absurd. It's very difficult for foreigners to invest in India. Let's talk about the public markets, the commodity market, the stock market. It's almost impossible for foreigners to invest in the public markets. I would say, Mr. Modi, this afternoon, we're going to make it completely open. Anybody, anywhere, can buy and sell currency and buy and sell commodities, can buy and sell shares, can buy and sell anything they want in India. And you're not going to say anything, and your bureaucrats, you get them another job. So they can become cricket umpires. They can do something besides sit here. No, they'd be horrible cricket umpires. So first, I would open the markets. Second, I would make the currency convertible. And I guess third, Well, I'd abolish most of the bureaucracy. You know, in India, it's illegal for foreigners to own more than 5 hectares. They're doing that to save the farmers. That's not saving the farmers, that's ruining agriculture in India. For centuries, India's had great agriculture. You have the weather, the rain, the soil, the people. But now you don't have great agriculture anymore because the bureaucracy has done so much to save the poor farmers. You know that hundreds of thousands of Indian farmers commit suicide every year. They're not saving the farmers, they're ruining the farmers. So I guess by that time, I would probably ask to leave the country. They would say, okay, we invited you here. We're sorry we invited you. Now go home. Now go home. After those three, I can probably come up with more too.
But I think three. Well, three is something that people typically tend to remember, right? That's why I said three. But see, there is an underlying theme. What you're trying to say is what I was also saying in that in that budget panel before you joined. Make it transparent, make the financial markets transparent, because from that will come the automatic thing of being able to make the rupee convertible fully. I mean, I'm also, most of the time the bureaucrats template is organized around the Russian template. So when Russia made their currency fully convertible, India should be doing it, except that they'll say, but we don't have natural resources. I'm just throwing something in there.
We don't have natural resources. Is that what you said?
And natural gas. I mean, natural gas, and for them, the fact that India spends so much money importing crude is this constant worry. Where do I get my next crude? Yeah, go ahead.
I live in Singapore. Singapore doesn't have natural gas. Singapore has no natural resources.
Yes.
Its currency is convertible, and it has been for a long time. As an example, I mean, I can go on and on, but go ahead.
So, I mean, that's one of the examples that people will say. I mean, you have hit the nail on the head. Many of these bureaucrats are actually trained to come and take courses in Harvard and Yale and Stanford and so on and so forth. They spend sometimes even up to a year or two. These are like, taking credits without having to go through a grade process. But, it's like auditing classes and so on and so forth. Some even take them for credit. So it's not that they don't see the West, but somehow when they get back into the cocoon, it's back to the same old setup, the same old thing. And things just continue the way they are. And it was my hope that this budget would change some of these things. But unfortunately, India is still continuing to do the same thing. And my personal perception is that India is spending more time distributing the wealth that they do not have.
Yep. It is. Mr. Modi gave out a lot of money to a lot of people. I'm sorry, I'm not Indian. I'm sure I could have figured out a way to get some of it. He's always passing it. But it's not just this administration. For a long time, Indian governments have figured out a way to buy votes, and they do so. It's not helping India. It may help a farmer for a year or two or three, but that's not helping Indian farmers. That's not helping India anything. Giving out money, I mean, you know the story as well as I do. You give a man a fish, and he's very happy for a day. You teach a man to fish and make him fish for himself, and he's happy for the rest of his life and rich for the rest of his life. India doesn't do that for some reason.
That's an excellent analogy, and I hope that this message goes home. So, Jim, I think
Sri, you're probably going to be asked not to come to India too, because you invited me on your show.
No, not at all. I think what I have done in my own little way, Jim, I unearthed a big scam in the National Stock Exchange, and for about 2 years, I hammered that there's rigging going on. I mean, essentially, I read Michael Lewis and I saw that the same template was applied in India without even the simple safeguards that Wall Street had. But you know what happened? After much hammering, the equivalent of SEC, SEBI, Securities and Exchange Board of India, did pass an order about 3-4 months ago, except they said that there was no fraud committed. And they imposed a whopping fine in terms of Indian rupees, 1,000 crores. But whoever they levied the fine on, they went to a court and got a stay order on it. And God only knows when that stay is going to get vacated. And in the meantime, life just goes on. And so what I'm trying to say is I have been writing about this and I have been visiting India every 3 months. Excellent people one-on-one. It's just that, when it comes to the policy making thing, somehow the things just don't seem to fall in place. But I do tell you one thing. India is very good when it sees a crisis. And maybe this next recession that you are forecasting, maybe that's what is going to make India to sit up and say, wait a minute, I can't really run this thing anymore like this.
Well, you know, there are plenty of smart Indians. Don't get me wrong. If I've suggested anything otherwise, the last head of the central bank in India, I wish he'd been head of the U.S. central bank. I mean, he knew what he was doing. He was a smart guy. Unfortunately, Americans wouldn't hire him. But no, you've had plenty of smart people in your history, and you will again. But I don't understand why you won't just open the economy. You call it transparency, call it what you will, and let the chips fall where they may. India's been around for a long, long time. At times in history, you've been the top, the absolute top, until you try to save each other and pay each other off and buy votes. You could be the top again, and you should be the top again. You and China both, as you know, many times in the last couple of thousand years, were the number one countries in the world.
Yes, I've read the Angus Madison stuff. Yes.
You can be again.
Yes.
Do it. You're not going to do it, though, by letting bureaucrats who went to Oxford and Cambridge and Harvard and Yale decide the future of how they're going to protect each other. Again, I went to Yale. I went to Oxford, so I know they're not so smart. You could do it yourself. Let the smart Indians have their head. They will come back to India. They'll stop immigrating. They'll come back. They will build the economy. They will build companies, and they will build India again. So you asked me what I would do. That's what I would tell Mr. Modi, and he'd say, "Okay, thank you. Here's your plane ticket. Go back home." I want to say one other thing. You know, I live in Singapore. Singapore was a British colony, same as you. Went through the same nightmare or whatever you want to call it, good times. But Singapore went the other way, and they opened up nearly completely. And I mean, you know, Singapore has been one of the most successful countries in the world in the past 50 years. India's gone the other way in the past, what's it been, since 1947?
71, you know? 72, yeah, right.
Well, no, India got independence in 47.
Yeah, we are 72 years young.
I'm sorry. Yeah, 71, 72 years. Yeah. You know, other countries, well, Taiwan, you know what happened to Hong Kong. Hong Kong was a British colony. You know what's happened to Hong Kong in the past 71 or 72 years. So it can be done. It can be done. Hong Kong was sort of a democracy, they said. Singapore is sort of a democracy, they said, like India. It can be done, and it should be done. And I hope it's done, because I love to visit India.
Thank you so much for your words of wisdom and your gift of time, Jim. I wish you a great weekend. And I hope to come back to you with some specific topics where we can wax eloquent, you know, talk about motorcycle riding. I used to ride a motorcycle myself. So I have had a lot of stories to tell. So thank you very much.
Thank you. I would love to do it. I rode a motorcycle through India too. No, there's a lot we can talk about. I look forward to it, either in India or Singapore or Silicon Valley.
Absolutely. Thank you very much. And
thank you. Bye-bye. Bye-bye.